Of all the conflicts that Star Wars became famous for, few were more infamous as well as more devastating than the Yuzong Vong War. Occurring just a few decades after the events of Return of the Jedi and Luke Skywalker's subsequent ascent to a Jedi Master, the Yuzong Vong War saw the extragalactic Yuzong Vong species, who were completely stripped of the Force, arrive in the main Star Wars galaxy, resulting in the deaths of over 300 trillion beings in the galactic populace. The Yuzong Vong War was, by all things considered, the most devastating war that the entire galaxy had ever faced, with the Yuzong Vong conquering the entire galaxy at one point, and even holding the capital world of Coruscant, with this resulting in the reorganization of the New Republic into the Galactic of Free Alliances and the signing of the Yuzong Vong Treaty, which permitted the Yuzong Vong to remain in the galaxy as long as they did not mount any form of hostile threat. Despite this, and despite its notoriety, there are many beings and people in the Star Wars community who have not read the new Jedi Order series, in which the Yuzong Vong novels take place. And for this video is for you. This video will go over the Herald of the Yuzong Vong War, puppet to the Shame Shaper Onimi. Yes, my friends, I am speaking about the Supreme Overlord, Shimrra Jamaane. The Yuzong Vong so powerful, he may just rival Darth Sidious. Shimrra Jamaane was the Supreme Overlord of the Yuzong Vong during the Yuzong Vong War, although in truth he was merely a puppet of the Force-sensitive Shame One Onimi, with Onimi being one of the only 3 Yuzong Vong to ever be Force-sensitive, besides perhaps the Yuzong Vong War Yamos, as well as the slaves. Born to the domain Jamaane, he was marked from birth as a candidate for the Supreme Overlord, the primary ruling point of the Yuzong Vong hierarchy. Around 29 BBY, he fell under the sway of the former Shaper Onimi, who utilized his esoteric force powers and mastery to take control of Shimrra. Under Onimi's direction, Shimrra overthrew the current supreme reigning overlord, Quarrel, with the new support of a variety of warriors, and then announced the discovery of a new galaxy, and proclaimed that the Yuzong Vong were destined to conquer it, whereas Quarrel had made the decision to avoid the galaxy out of fear, due to the presence primarily of the living planet known as Zonamasekot. The reason they had chosen to avoid this planet was due to the fact that during the war that had stripped them of their home galaxy, devastating the sentient planet Yuzan Tar, the planet which the entire Yuzong Vong species originated in, actually stripped them of the Force entirely. Unknowingly, however, this was a mistake on Yuzan Tar's part, the sentient planet unknowingly giving the Yuzong Vong the most fatal weakness, them not being able to be sensed through the Force. How Jedi and Sith work with regards to their Force powers are primarily due to the fact they can sense other individuals through the Force. Various beings such as Darth Malgus, Sidious, Plagueis, and Yoda utilize the Force to mask their presence. However, this requires an intense amount of concentration as well as an innate aptitude with the ability. The Yuzong Vong required no such aptitude. They were born with it. They were born as a hollow void in the Force, with Luke Skywalker even noting that Shimrra Jamaane was a void that he could not fathom, unlike Darth Sidious on the second Death Star, who he had viewed as pure evil incarnate. Shimrra Jamaane was something that Luke could not even perceive, a black hole of the Force as Sidious had previously been described. But at this time, he wasn't even the Force, while Sidious was swirling with pulsating dark-side energy. All Shimrra was a pure void. No stars, no light, only doom, only death, and only the remnants of the galaxy that the Yuzong Vong had destroyed. In the year 25 ABY, the Yuzong Vong, led by their subsect called the Prioritite Vong, launched their primary invasion of the Star Wars galaxy, beginning the conflict known as the Yuzong Vong War. The Yuzong Vong made early gains and soon had the New Republic reeling, very similar to the Thrawn campaign in 9 ABY, which nearly saw the utter annihilation of the New Republic. 3 years into the war, Shimrra settled on the newly proclaimed Yuzan Tar, which would be in all actuality the political homeworld of the galaxy of Coruscant, which would be his home for the rest of the war. He conducted meetings from his palace, directing the war and attempting to quash the Jedi heresy. However, the war took a downward spiral after the Battle of Ebux 9, and Shimrra grew increasingly unstable, both mentally and in terms of power. In 29 ABY, Zonamasekot, purportedly a sign of doom, appeared above Yuzan Tar, sparking riots and weakening Shimra's already declining power base. Soon after this, the Battle of Yuzan Tar commenced. Refusing to surrender Yuzan Tar to the Galactic Alliance, Shimrra set fire to large swaths of the planet. with him being finally attacked in his citadel by a trio of the most notable Jedi of the war, led by Jedi Grand Master Luke Skywalker, who dueled and finally beheaded the Supreme Overlord, killing him. In the aftermath of Shimra's demise, Jason Solo would achieve a complete temporal oneness with the Force and kill the Shame Shaper Onimi, and would eventuate into the surrender of the Yuzong Vong people itself. Shimura is one of my favorite characters in all of Star Wars lore, and despite his tale ending here, there is so much more lore about him that I intend to unpack. I intend to make a full video dedicated to Shimura's power, and then a video on his life furthermore, and then compile it with this video to make a complete Shimura mashup, roughly around an hour to 2 hours long. And trust me, my friends, I am 100% looking forward to making those videos, as the Yuzong Vong War is one of my favorite time periods in all of Star Wars, perhaps only behind the original trilogy, prequel trilogy, and Old Republic era. However, on with the video. We are going to dissect the final battle, very similar to previous analysis that I have done, such as the duel on Bespin, duel in the throne room on the Death Star, as well as the duel in the Coruscant Senator Chamber. Today we are going to be analysing the final duel between Shimrra Jamaane, the Supreme Overlord, and Luke Skywalker, the Jedi Grand Master. Shimrra was interrupted at the tail end of the Yuzong Vong War from his meditation by the Supreme Commander Lai, who informed the Supreme Overlord that Nas Chakar had a message for him. A Galactic Alliance fleet had stood between the Yuzong Vong and the Zanama Sekot, the sentient world aforementioned. And though the Chokka's forces had broken through enemy lines, Zanama Sekot had launched its own defenses, a variety of living ships. Shimrra and all the Yuzong Vong present were stunned by this news, while several priests questioned whether Shimrra could have been mistaken. The Supreme Overlord had his slaves execute them, lest his tenuous hold on power continued to slip. In reply to the musings of the High Prefect Druthel and High Priest Jakan, he proclaimed that the heretics were responsible for the appearance of these infidel vessels. To utterly quell and settle this matter, Shimrra placed half of his warriors strategically in his citadel, under the command of the Yuzong Vong Noma Nor, who was one of the most notable players in the entirety of the Yuzong Vong War, being around when it first commenced in 25 ABY. Noma Nor would then direct the execution of every single heretic on Yuzon Tar. Fearing ultimate defeat, the Supreme Overlord was also able to convince the World Brain to create fires all over the surface of Yuzon Tar, in hopes of rendering it completely uninhabitable to avoid invasion. Meanwhile, the Battle of Yuzon Tar raged on around the Supreme Overlord as his tenuous grip on power began to slip. The Galactic Alliance vessels battling Yuzong Vong coral skippers and ships above Yuzon Tar. Contemporaneously, the Yuzong Vong tried to crash the infected vessel on Zanama Sekot, which currently in system near the planet Muscade. A number of Galactic Alliance soldiers following this and Jedi were able to land on Yuzon Tar, and 3 Jedi managed to penetrate the Yuzong Vong's defenses and end the Shimrra Citadel. In his private quarters with Onimi and 15 Slayers, Shimrra waited for her arrival, keeping in his rose the lightsaber of the Jedi Anakin Solo, who had died during the mission to Makir 2 years earlier after achieving total oneness with the Force. Soon, the trio made their way to Shimra's private dwelling. There, the Jedi, Luke Skywalker, the Grand Master, Jason Solo, and Jaina Solo engaged the Slayers, who were harvested from the Force-sensitive tissue of former Jedi in combat. Despite Onimi's intensive employment of powers to shift the Citadel's ground, constantly throwing everyone off balance, the Slayers were unable to defeat the powerful Jedi, with Luke Skywalker in particular putting up a ferocious assault. Shimrra soon entered the fight himself, wielding a special ampi-staff constructed especially for him known as the Scepter of Power. He then engaged Skywalker in single combat while the remainder of the Slayers dueled the Solos. The Supreme Overlord being so formidable in combat, he was able to gain the upper hand, eventually wrapping his ampi-staff around Skywalker, coiling it around him like a snake. The Jedi also suffered a bite from the creature, spreading poison throughout his body. With Skywalker at his mercy, Shimrra then drew Solo's lightsaber from his robes, intending to kill the Grand Master with the blade of his own nephew. As Shimrra moved to decapitate Skywalker with the weapon, the Jedi used the Force to pull Anakin Solo's lightsaber from the Supreme Overlord's hand. With the Yuzong Vong distracted, Skywalker swiftly sliced the Scepter of Power into pieces, and then decapitated Shimrra, ending his life, completing a Sarchar attack. Meanwhile, Jason and Jaina pursued Onimi up into the Citadel's private Yorick Tremor escape vessel, where the Shamed One revealed that he was the true Supreme Overlord, having used his powers to control Shimrra for decades on end. Jason was able to kill him eventually, and a short time later, the Yuzong Vong fleet over Yuzon Tar, which had eventually failed to destroy the planet Zanama Sekot, learned that Shimrra had died. The first time in their history, the species was without a supreme overlord, their conduit to their gods, chief among them being Yun Yuzon. In addition, because Shimra had eliminated all potential challenges, the Yuzong Wong had no one to take up the mantle and lead them. Completely lost and without their ruler, the species completely surrendered, demoralized and stunned. Soon after, the treaty known as the Sakota Accords was signed, stating that the Yuzong Wong would destroy all of their weapons, abandon their warrior-like ways, and settle on the number Sakota, which the Jedi had eventually realized was the seat of the original Yuzon Ta. And with this, the Yuzong Vong War, which had claimed the life of over 300 trillion beings of the galactic populace, was finally over. Befitting a supreme overlord of immense power, Shimra had an immense belief and zealous loyalty to that of the gods, particularly Yun Yuzon, the chief deity among the pantheon of Yuzong Vong beings. He has a very famous quote from the New Jedi Order series, which I will read now. I will educate you about the gods. The question is not whether they exist, but if we have further need of them. Therefore began during our long journey, when they failed to come to our aid. As you have undoubtedly learned, Prefect, one cannot keep loyal servants if one neglects them. So the fault lies with them. Absent our bloody support, absent our solicitations and praises, and what would they be left with? The gods may have created us, but it is we who sustain them through worship. Now they are benefit because the roles are reversed. They are angry because they have been forced to recognize that their hour has arrived, that the time has come to surrender the power to Shimra and the new order. Shimura spent most of the last 6 decades of his perhaps century-long life under the control of the puppet Onimi, who used his force powers to bend Shimura to his will easily. During his time as Onimi's puppet, Shimura was characterized by his immense violence and cruelty, his desire to protect and express his power, and his ability to manipulate and coerce others. Though the other Yuzong Vong were a violent species, Shimura had an extreme reputation for being more vicious than most members of the species, save a select few. Shimura is thought to exterminate all infidels, believing it to be his duty as demanded by the gods. He was ruthless in this quest, and by the end of the Yuzong Vong War, over one-third of the warrior caste had died. Despite reprimanding Tazvong La for wasting his troops, Shimura was content to sacrifice a great number of Yuzong Vong in pursuit of his goals, namely the complete and utter total conquest of the galactic rim, as well as the galactic populace into subservience. He hated the Jedi heresy, decrying its followers and leader, Yushar, and was willing to kill all the members in the households of two prefects simply for having heretics in their home. Even when it was proven that the heretics had been merely planted by Nagula, Shimura refused to allow the reputations of now dead intendants to be restored, saying that their deaths would stand as examples for other rebellious Yuzong Vong who preached different ideologies to that of Shimura. So great was Shimura's hatred for the heresy that he had Zara killed after being accused of heresy by Nagula, despite the fact that he had already determined that the priestess was merely falsifying the evidence. As the supreme overlord of the Yuzong Vong, Shimura was believed to be the species' soul linked to the most important god, the creator god who the Yuzong Vong believed created the entire universe itself, Yun Yuzon, and consequently, due to this perceived to be omniscient connection, had a near unlimited power and influence over his people, a temporal one that was seemingly eternal. He served as the head of all castes, having the authority to command everything from the efforts of the warrior caste to the priests worshipping. Shimura loved his power, and went to great lengths to protect it after overthrowing Koril. This included killing many thousands of heretics, as well as anyone who dared to oppose Shimura's will. Shimura suppressed all knowledge of the living planet of Zanoma and killed Ekram Val for discovering the planet during the Yuzong Vong War so as to prevent others from learning of the world that supposedly foretold the Yuzong Vong's own downfall. He also kept from his species from decades of the knowledge of emptiness of the eight cortex, knowing that if such knowledge ever spread, his authority would greatly weaken over his subjects. For much of his life, Shimura exerted total control over the Yuzong Vong, ruling with a complete iron fist very similar to Palpatine of the Galactic Empire. He frequently ignored the advice of his advisors on the Great Yuzong Vong Council. The Supreme Overlord intimidated other members of his species into eternal submission, and gained a reputation for being ruthless and terrifying. Other Yuzong Vong were fearful of him, and even War Masters trembled in his presence. In addition, Shimura had an uncanny ability to sense what others were thinking, possessing a rudimentary form of telepathy, thanks to the influence of Onimi's force sensitivity. Such was this Supreme Overlord, seeing omniscience that High Prefect Yug Skell once warned Nominor to never ever think of lying to Shimura, as Shimura was also extremely skilled at manipulating others, very similar to the likes of the Rakatan Skull Nas or Palpatine. and was talented in the field of political intrigue. Although nowhere near to his predecessor in Palpatine, he was still quite notable, especially for a Yuzong Vong. Animi was able to use his force powers to subtly influence other Yuzong Vong, thus making it appear as though Shimra had the mysterious ability to influence and affect others' minds. This added to his reputation as a terrifying, omniscient leader, and caused the other Yuzong Vong to be extremely zealously loyal to him, in fear he would invoke the wrath and power of the gods if they ever were to betray or backstab him. To help further his stature as an omnipotent vessel of the gods, Shimra had both his public and private thrones in his citadel equipped with dove and basalt, creatures that could emanate and produce giant gravitational wells and fields. Through usage of these dove and basalt, Shimra made it seem as though those who walked towards his throne were walking uphill, and that to merely approach the Supreme Overlord was a monumental task in itself due to his nigh omnipotent power. Unlike most Yuzong Vong, Shimra did not place its faith in the gods, but sought to overthrow them and become the chief deity, very similar to the likes of Valkorion, with Valkorion playing on Isaacs the Ultimate Devourer, with Isaacs being the chief among the Ikoath gods, playing on a prophecy that would see a demon savior ascend from the mere planet of Zakul to overthrow the gods, therefore allowing Valkorion to, in a similar way to Shimra, gain complete and utter control over his people. Under the influence of Onimi, Shimra grew to hate the gods and declared war on them multiple times, believing that the Yuzongvong had surpassed them and were ready to take their place. Shimra thought the gods were fearful of this, and that they conspired to destroy the Yuzongvong multiple times. The appearance of the living planet of Zanama Sakot in 29 ABY was merely a test, as the Supreme Overlord believed. By destroying Zanama Sakot, he felt the species would prove themselves and force the gods to surrender. By 29 ABY, Shimra had gone completely and utterly insane. Despite his ability to intimidate and manipulate others, many Yuzongvong had lost confidence in their leader. His declaration that the gods were the Yuzongvong's true enemy, not the Galactic Alliance, were met with immense skepticism from the elite, a group that was normally extremely fearful of him. However, some of them had heard rumors of Zanama Sakot. As the war began to take a downward spiral following various battles, their faith in Shimra wavered, with some believing the Yuzongvong had been better off under Koriel. Prefect Nominor and High Prefect Jarthul were two such members of the Supreme Overlord's court who had lost all confidence in Shimra by the Battle of Yuzon Tar. Anor believed that Shimra no longer provided stable guidance for the Yuzon Vault, and that the species' crusade against the main galaxy was lost. To maintain the charade that Shimra was the Supreme Overlord, and Onimi nothing more than his court jester, Onimi had Shimra abuse him consistently in public. This prevented anyone from learning that Onimi was the true power behind the throne. Although many wondered why the Supreme Overlord kept a shamed one as his familiar, how they did not question Shimra to his face as they knew he would kill them. As the Supreme Overlord, Shimra was frequently addressed as Dreadlord, Great One, or Fearsome One, among various of those titles, very similar to the ancient Rakatan warlord Soa, who gained the moniker of the Infernal One. With regards to his appearance, Shimra was extremely large, modified intensely by Yuzongvong shapers. Luke Skywalker noted that the Supreme Overlord was the largest and bulkiest Yuzongvong he had ever seen, and Nomanor observed that he towered over the elite in meetings. The Haeopolic creatures that made up his throne would occasionally burst due to strain placed on them from supporting the Supreme Overlord's massive frame. Shimra had thin limbs and a large head, with his torso and head being covered in brands of tattoos from honoring the gods, with him wearing grave robes made from the flesh of Sting, a rebellious Yuzongvong war master from a millennia prior. Shimra had a Makwididic implanted eyes that constantly shifted colors, although they were most often red. His eyes glittered when he was furious, and had the effect of causing anyone under his gaze to feel intimidated and scared, as though the victim's mind was being read. Nominor feared the Supreme Overlord's eyes, finding the frequent color changes to be extremely unnerving for himself. And this is Nominor we're talking about, one of the most brutal men in all of galactic history, even considering Yuzong Vong and the Rakata. So, my friends, what did you think about this video? In my personal opinion, Shimrra Jamaane is one of the least explored characters in all of Star Wars Legends, and truly deserves to be explored more. I plan to create more videos on him as aforementioned, and if you want to see that, please put that in the comments below. With that out of the way, my friends, I bid you farewell. I'll see you in the next video, and remember, the Force will be with you.